So today we're talking about presentations. And the first thing I wanted to do is just go over this packet with you real quick so you kind of knew what this was. So this was created by Dr. Marge Nadler and me back when I taught at Miami University. So this first part just tells you some tips on what to do for delivery, what the voice does, what the body should do, tips. This tells you some guidelines for oral citation. I don't think it's something that people typically teach. I think they talk a lot about how to cite in a paper, but I don't think they talk a lot about how to cite inside a speech. And then it talks a little bit about how to interpret evidence. So you don't just want to state the evidence, but you also want to interpret the evidence and then apply it to your listeners. So here we have more Americans are dying in alcohol-related accidents than ever before. According to a latest report in 2004, 7 out of 10 accidents involve alcohol. So more than half of all accidents occurring today involve the misuse of alcohol. So most of us don't think about it when we drive to the store and make plans home for spring break, but odds are when we drive home, we will meet a drunk driver head on. So not all of us are math-minded. And so spouting out statistics don't really mean much to some of the people in your audience. So it actually is very helpful to not just preview the evidence and cite the evidence, but also interpret and apply the evidence. So kind of think about that. This section is included for those of you that are nervous. I will say that you are a little bit blessed in that you are not in the typical written professional communication situation where you do have to present to 20 of your peers. You're probably presenting this in your dorm room or in your home, and you can practice this as many times as you want. So this is not really a typical public speaking situation, but it's about as close as we can get given the online situation that we have. But who knows, maybe this still makes you a little bit nervous. If it does, here is some tips. The other thing is this class is meant to prepare you for the business world. So eventually you probably are going to have to give a presentation. So I think these tips will be helpful. This is the outline. This is the one that you're going to want to turn in. Please pay attention to these 5 issues. If you don't have these and you don't have them labeled, that's going to be points off. So please make sure to have that. So the first is the attention getter. The attention getter is just kind of how it states. We're thinking about a lot of different things and we have a lot of different things in our mind. And so how do you pull your audience in? How do you make them care? How do you get me to really care about your proposal? And how do you do that creatively? And I'll give you some examples whenever we go to the actual PowerPoint, which we'll start here in just a minute. The thesis, I think you know by this point in college what a thesis is, or it's your main points plus the meat of what you're trying to say. And then why the audience should listen and why the topic is relevant to them. This may have to be a little bit of a stretch in some situations, but if you're having problems with this, let me know. And then your credibility. So talk to me a little bit about what's your background in this? What do you know about this? Do you have a degree in this? Is this kind of a topic that you've been fascinated with for a while? And then preview your main points using signposting. And what signposting is first, second, third, and I've kind of encouraged a lot of you throughout the semester to use signposting in your papers. And this is just good organizational skills. It shows people that you've got your stuff together, you know what you're talking about, you're organized. This transition, actually your preview kind of acts as the transition, but you can have another transition and say, so let's go ahead and get started, or just to let the people know that you're going from your intro into the body. You'll notice here that they have 3 main points. Don't have more than 5. Most people cannot remember more than 5 main points. The other thing is people tend to forget, I think it's like they only remember, what is it, 80% of a message after 24 hours, and then it goes down even more to that. So like retention is not very high. So the less you give, the more we'll remember. Repetition is good. in public speaking situations very, very different than the written word. Oh, I know what it is. People forget 80% of an original message after 24 hours. And then underneath here, you have like all the supporting material. Then you've got the two parts of the conclusion, which is your summary and your creative closing. The summary is basically like your preview statement, only it's labeled something different, and the creative closing is a lot like the attention getter, again, labeled something different. So it's just like in a movie, you want to make sure that you end nicely. Okay, so in case that you're still kind of stuck, here is an outline example using outlining. So here's an example for you. Okay, so that kind of explains the handout. And then let me go ahead and pull up our PowerPoint here. All right, so the first kind of thing that I would do if we were together would ask you, what presentations have you seen that you think are effective, and what makes for a successful visual aid in PowerPoint? When I think of successful public speakers, I definitely think of Obama. I think, all politics aside, I think that he is captivating. I think a lot of times of comedians. I usually use clips from comedians to show what makes for someone who's captivating or someone that can show vocal variety. I'll put a couple clips up later that show clips of my favorite comedians kind of illustrating some vocal variety. What should speakers avoid regarding delivery and content of a presentation? Usually I hear people say you want to avoid verbal fillers, monotone, distracting gestures. Why are people nervous about public speaking? I think that this is as varied as the people who give the speeches. Some people, they don't like all eyes on them. Sometimes they are worried that about the Q&A part. Somebody may ask them a question that they don't know. What I'll tell you about that is tell them you don't know. Tell them you'll find out later for them. The worst thing you can possibly do is lie or give misinformation. So say, you know what, that's a really good question, and I will find out for you. And then follow up and find out for them. That's going to make you look much more credible than lying to them. And then how do we overcome nervousness? I think that, again, this is as varied as the people who are nervous. So sometimes exercise, I think the day before helps. I think talking about a subject that you're passionate about helps. I think realizing that it's just 4 minutes or it's just 6 minutes, or that it's just that really in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. They say that don't sweat the small stuff. It's all small stuff. And I've also heard that fear is just false expectations appearing real, right? So FEAR, false expectations appearing real. And all these things that we think are going to happen are not actually going to happen. So a lot of this is positive thinking, preparation, doing everything you can to make sure that you're successful. So we're going to continue to talk a little bit about nervousness and how to overcome it. But these are definitely things that we would be discussing in detail as a class together. All right, so the vocal aspects of delivery. Volume, pitch, articulation, pronunciation, rate, pauses, vocal variety, and inflection. These are all things that a successful speaker has. A successful speaker is loud enough. You can hear them from the back of the room. They're not too soft. They're not too loud. So volume. Pitch. This is the difference between Mariah Carey versus Barry White. So articulation and pronunciation. These two, it has to do with the crispness of what you're saying versus saying a word correctly. So articulation is the forcefulness, with which a word is said, and pronunciation is saying a word correctly. Rate has to do with how quickly or how slowly you say something. So when my father talks, he tells stories very, very slowly. So he has a very slow rate. My husband has a very slow rate too. I tend to have a very quick rate. Actually, I've been told that I need to slow down my rate, and it's something that I do work on, but I'm somewhat afraid that it may be something that I'm stuck with. Pauses, I think that they have their place. They can be used for dramatic pauses. They can be purposeful. They can allow people time to think. If you do pause, that's okay. I think drawing attention to it is not good. I think that if you mess up in a speech, drawing attention to it again is not a good idea. And what vocal variety is putting all those things together. It's the right volume, pitch, articulation, pronunciation, rate, and pauses. All those things together with inflection is vocal variety. So when you read to a child, you best have vocal variety or they are not going to listen. So for those of you that have brothers and sisters, or even cousins, or maybe you babysit, when you read to a child and you're pretending to be the big monster in the Halloween book, that's vocal variety. You're sounding like the monster. Inflection is the stress that you put on a word. So let's take a look at this using pauses and inflection to see how just as something as simple as vocal aspects can change the meaning of a sentence. Woman, without her man is nothing. Woman, without her man is nothing. I would not say you lost the fight. I would not say you lost the fight. I would not say you lost the fight. So we can see putting a different inflection or emphasis on each one of these words, we have a completely different sentence. So, woman without her man is nothing. Woman without her man is nothing. So, same words, but completely different meaning in a sentence, all because of where I chose to pause and where I chose to put meaning and inflection behind the word. I would not say you lost the fight. I would not say you lost the fight. Again, so we see how something as simple as the vocal aspects change the meaning of a message. Then we have the physical aspects of delivery: personal appearance, movement, body language, gestures, eye contact, facial expressions, poise, and posture. I have a lot of students ask me, does it matter what I wear? I think you know the answer to that question. When we show up for job interviews, does it matter what we wear? You should be dressed professionally. You should, right? So that's the correct answer. But I do tell my students that I'm not going to tell you what to wear. You are an adult and you can make your own decisions. I will let you know, though, that non-verbally people make their judgments, and kind of keep that in mind. But I will tell you, in business situations, you need to be dressed professionally and look at the culture that you're in and match that culture. Movement. Some movement is okay. I think too much movement is distracting. I would say aim for the speech triangle, which, if you're familiar with speech or debate, is probably something that you're familiar with. You want to move as you're transitioning. So you start at the front of the room, start at the center. Now that we've talked a little bit about how the 911 app is needed in Pittsburgh, let's move to talk about how the app works. So I'm moving from main point 1 to main point 2. And then I would go from main point 2 to main point 3. So generally, I would say you want to move when you want to gesture. So I have 3 things to talk about, and then maybe I hold up my hand gesturing the sign of 3, and then I would move whenever I'm transitioning from one point to the next. That would be my suggestions in terms of movement. These suggestions all come from a former public speaking teacher. So it's not just, this is kind of what I think, but I do have some research and kind of experience behind this as well. Body language. Be clear about what you are communicating. When you stand at the front of the room and you have your arms crossed, you may be cold, but I hope you know you're communicating that you're closed off. When you sit at the back of the classroom and you put your head down, you may be tired, but you are communicating to your professor that you don't care. So I think a lot of the times you can't, one thing they often say is you can't not communicate. We're always communicating. People will judge us not based on our intentions. They based on their perception. And for them, perception is reality. So if you're yawning all the way through a professor's lecture, you can't help how that is going to be interpreted. Now, granted, it may have nothing to do with how you think or feel about that lecture, but that they're going to interpret it or think about it that way. So be very aware of whenever you're around other people, what is my body language saying? Am I being closed off or am I being open? Gestures. Make sure that they're purposeful. We're going to talk more in detail in this next slide about what gestures can actually do because they're quite powerful. Eye contact. You want to, if you can, have eye contact with everyone in the room. I will tell you that being a right-handed person, I tend to dominantly look at the left side of the room. I have to physically tell myself to look at the right side of the room. And it would be vice versa for you. If you were a left-handed person, you would probably dominantly look at the right-hand side of the room. So it's just something that our brain does. I'm not really sure why. It's very difficult to kind of stop. So try to look people in the eye. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul. That's how you connect. If you're nervous, start with the eyebrows. Eventually, I would like for you to get to the point where you're looking at the eyes. Facial expressions, make sure they match. Talking about something solemn, be solemn. Talking about something excited, get excited. It goes back again to this emotional contagion theory, the idea that we tend to catch the emotions of others. Be poised, have a good posture, look professional, look like you're together. So gestures. Gestures can do a lot. They can repeat what we're already saying. So maybe I'm talking about how when you make a cake, you want to be sure, maybe it's a how-to speech. You want to be sure that you mix all the ingredients together very, very well, very thoroughly. And so I'm showing with my whisk that it's very important to blend. And so as I'm talking about blending, I'm gesturing whisking. Contradict. Maybe I want to show the opposite of something, or I'm trying to be funny, or I'm trying to be sarcastic. And so instead of doing something like repeating, I'm trying to show the exact opposite. So maybe I want to say something like, yeah, she was real friendly, or she was real warm. And while I do that, I roll my eyes, or my tone is kind of sarcastic. So in rolling my eyes and maybe putting my hand on my hip, I'm contradicting that she was in fact not friendly. Substitute. Sometimes it takes the place of what we're trying to do. So if you're trying to show someone how to tie a tie, it's very difficult to do that without actually just showing them how to tie a tie. So instead of maybe even walking them through it, I say, watch me or look at me do this. And so that gesture substitutes what I would be saying. Sometimes it complements it. Maybe when you are emphasizing how much you care about someone, you're patting them on the back. Like that would be a gesture that would complement how you feel. Or maybe you're talking about how you have 3 main points in your speech. So you would hold up the 3 to complement the fact that you have 3 main points. Emphasize. Imagine a professor standing up at the front of the room and they're banging their fist on the desk and they're saying, you need to take these notes down. So they're saying, hey, pay attention. This is really important. And then finally, regulate. Maybe the speaker feels as though the audience is too close. And so the speaker holds their hand up as if to provide space between them and the audience. And so regulate is a way to distance yourself or attempt to control. provide space. And one thing to kind of think about this is gestures don't just exist inside the realm of public speaking. When I'm talking about complimenting, and I offered the example of patting someone on the back when you say you care for them, gestures exist in interpersonal communication as well, like our nonverbal messages with our verbal messages. Okay, so this is the important stuff here. Intros and conclusions. You have to have these 5 parts, and you have to have these 2 parts of the conclusion. So, in an intro, let's pretend that our speech is about this 911 app that my RMU student came up with. He thinks that it would be a good idea to, instead of using a phone call, to have a 911 app where all you have to do is hit a button and help is on its way. So, the attention getter could be a really loud siren, right? And the idea behind the attention getter, it could be a video, it could be a clip, it could be music, it could be a quote, it could be a joke, it could be really anything. Like one time I had a student come in a bathing suit. I would say that was shocking. Maybe not the best attention getter, but I certainly remember it. We have so many things on our mind. So many things we're thinking about. And so we have to get them to hit the pause button. What can you do to get them to hit the pause button? To gather their attention for just a minute. All right, the thesis I think is kind of self-explanatory. What's the main point plus the meat of what you're saying? The credibility. So for my student that developed this app, he studies computers and he's all about apps, and this is what he wants to do. And he also was a former EMT. So talk about credibility. And he talks about his experience and his time, and he does that in a way where he's not saying, I am credible because, because that's, no, that doesn't work. He's talking about it in a way where you just kind of feel at ease, like he knows his stuff. And then audience relevancy. Maybe I want to provide some kind of statistic about how many people in their lifetime are in a major emergency. And then finally, previewing with signposting, that's where you want to say first, second, and third. So I will talk about 3 main points in my speech. First, I'm going to talk about the problem of why it takes 9 minutes for help to come in Pittsburgh, where it only takes 80 seconds for fire. Why does it take 9 minutes with everything else when we can get 80 seconds of help with fire? Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about why my plan is the best. And third, I'm going to ask for funding for my 911 app. Okay? So that would be an example of all the parts you need for your intro. Conclusion, same thing. You need these 2 parts, the summary. So today I've talked to you about I think they're calling their app Yin's All Right to kind of give a nod to Pittsburgh. And obviously the all right part is the whole emergency part, I guess. It's very, very creative. And then the creative closer. So the summary would be, I talked to you about my Yin's All Right plan and why it should be adopted. And then maybe the creative closer could be an example of how the app works, or showing a picture of what the app looks like. Or maybe it's a commercial for an app or what it's going to cost. So this is kind of how you want to format and put together your intro and your conclusion. Intros and conclusions, doesn't matter what it's for. It could be for an RFP. It could be for another class. I think this is pretty much what you need for any presentation. Okay, main points. So the body of the speech. Generally, you want 2 to 5. I always say less is more. They obviously tell what the thesis is. Use parallel language if possible. What I mean by that is similar patterns of words. So the first thing you need to know about the 911 app, the second thing you need to know about the 911 app, make sure you have transitions and internal summaries. Like I said, our minds wander. And so if you have little hints in there, if someone does happen to kind of space off a little bit, they can come back into your presentation. So if you say, now that we've talked a little bit about why Pittsburgh needs something other than 911 call, let's talk a little bit about how the app actually works. And then finally, make sure that you're presenting that information in the best way. Chronological, problem solution, topical, cause effect, spatial, Monroe's. So we've got a couple different options. And we talked about some of these patterns early in the semester. Some of these are self-explanatory. I think we all know chronological order. First, second, third. Problem solution, also kind of self-explanatory, talking about the issue, then talking about how that issue can be resolved. Topical, they were talking about different types of fireworks, right? That could be maybe a topic. Or cause effect could actually be another way that you could potentially, you were talking about why it takes 8 minutes and then what is the effect of that? What happens in those 8 or 9 minutes when people aren't receiving help? And then spatial, that would be like if we're talking about the cathedral of learning from the very, very tippy top to the very, very bottom. And then Monroe's, remember that goes back when we were talking about persuasion, and we said like the need, the visualization, the call, all those kind of steps. Those are all options for you. If you're drawing a blank on some of these, you can go back and look at the persuasion PowerPoint, or go back and look at the PowerPoints that talk about organizing and outlining, because they talk about these, okay? All right, visual aid options. So moving out of the outline and out of the speech and talking about visual aids in general. Most people generally will use PowerPoint. You see the comic there. It says, I sort of thought your presentation was going to be in PowerPoint. And he's got little I would say Muppets. I don't know why. I can't think of what those are for some reason right now. But most people do use puppets. Why was I saying Muppets? Sorry. Most people will use PowerPoint for this. You're certainly not required to, but you do have to have some type of visual aid. That could be a handout that you'd like for us to have. There's all different kinds of options. It could be a video that you'd like for us to see, maybe an object, whatever you feel like is going to increase the audience retention and understanding. You could have a poster. The only thing with that is like when you're making it yourself, it can get kind of messy. So you'd want it to still be professional. So here's some options, and we could certainly generate some other ideas. So here's some ideas about designing visuals. Usually you want to use self-explanatory visuals. This says, I need someone well-versed in the art of torture. Do you know PowerPoint? And I think this is how most people feel about PowerPoint, yet it's kind of here to stay. I've taught this class since early 2003, and not much has altered or changed. You do still have to cite, so make sure that you're giving credit where credit is due. Think about cultural norms. Not everyone processes information the same way, especially if you're giving a presentation in another country. Make sure that you kind of know like what are their cultural norms, what are they used to. Consider the use of sounds, animation, clip art, colors, fonts, and slide design. Less is more. I always say less is more. I think some is okay. I generally go with what's offered. I don't have a background in design. I worked for a newspaper. I worked for like the yearbook and the newspaper in high school and in college. And so I have some understanding of design, but I'm certainly not a graphic designer. So I think you have to kind of be okay with where you are with those things and be mindful of that. So that's why I just kind of use what's offered by Microsoft Word, and I don't get too fancy. Here's some delivery stuff with visual aids. 30 font size and 40/50 for headers. That's font size. So this is keeping kind of everyone in mind. Not everyone is 26 years old in the audience. Use your visual aid, then hide it. Practice under real world conditions if you can. At bare minimum, go to the room beforehand. If you have a presentation in the cathedral, you need to go more than the day before and check it out. You want to see, okay, is there a projector in that room? Am I going to have the ability to use the TV? Plan for something to go wrong. And every time I teach, I always go before the semester and see, all right, what am I working with? Do I have an Elmo projector? Do I have, what's in the room? One time I went and the bulb was burned out. It's just imagine the worst. It sounds awful, but imagine the worst is going to happen. Videotape your presentation if you can. That'll let you know what distracting mannerisms you have, and practice in front of an audience because they'll be able to provide you feedback. I always say practice your presentation at least 3 times. Practice it and time it. If you are over all 3 times, you've got to cut. If you are under the time limit, I would say see where you need to add or see where parts of your presentation are weak. Plan a backup. If you're going to use PowerPoint, plan for it not to work. Maybe have a handout that you can show everybody, or maybe have a copy of your slides. It may not be exactly what you want, but at least you have something. One of the best things that I learned from my mentor for teaching is she said, have a backup. And then she said, and you know what? Have a backup for your backup. And it saved me. It saved me on multiple occasions because technology will not work when you need it to. So I'm not sure what questions you have. This is kind of a passion of mine. I have a background in my master's is in speech communication. Most of the time I taught public speaking, so it's the class that I probably taught the most. I'm getting more and more experience with teaching in the English classes now, but I have a lot of interest and passion for communication. So let me know what questions you have. I would love to help.